Hey, I'm Emily. Welcome to The Science Fix, a podcast about women in science, who they are, what they do, and the challenges they still have to face, hosted by WiSTEM at King's. Today we're going to be meeting some great women from science and higher education. First, a story about discrimination, about names, and about the fabric of the universe.
So my name's Émilie Gachon. I'm a new PhD student in the physics department, and I am in the biophysics group.
Excellent. Okay, cool. So today we're talking about Cecilia Payne. And do you want to tell me why we're doing that?
We're going to talk about Cecilia Payne because, well, first of all, she was a great scientist. She actually was the first person to ever discover what the sun and stars are mainly made up of, which is helium and hydrogen. And at the time, that was not well accepted in the field. And yeah.
One of the reasons she's on this podcast, obviously, is because she is also a female scientist. Mm-hmm. How did that figure in her life, the fact that she was a woman?
Right. So she was born in 1900, and she started her education in Cambridge in England. The first, hurdle she faced was that she couldn't get a PhD from Cambridge, because if you went on to get a graduate degree in Cambridge, you could not do research, you were bound to do teaching. And so she basically got her way into Harvard to do her PhD there, and which she did in 2 years and got remarkable results there. The astronomy department or astrophysics department at Harvard did not exist when she first got there. She therefore had to be a PhD candidate in the physics department, but the chairman of the department was Mr. Lyman, and he did not accept any women candidates, and so her supervisors basically had to create the entire astrophysics department just around her and her degree.
So one of the interesting things about her is she's obviously known now as Cecilia Payne, but Payne is actually her maiden name.
Right, yeah.
So she married and became Cecilia Payne Gaposchkin, probably butchering that. And I think it's an interesting point because women then, they had to decide how are they going to publish, which name is my official name,
right,
or my scientific name. And, it made me think about Maria Goeppert-Meyer, who also started out having her maiden name Goeppert and then married and took Meyer. And I think it's an interesting thing for us even today. We have to think about when you publish your first paper, that's the paper that is going to cement you as a scientist in your field. So you have to make the decision to say, right, am I going to use my maiden name? If you're married, am I going to go with a married name? And then if you've gone with your maiden name, if in future you do get married,
you have to stick with it.
You have to stick with it. It's like a sort of different identity. I don't know if it's a crisis per se, but it's a different identity perspective that I think male scientists have probably never had to deal with.
Right.
And unless, I guess, the way we have names fundamentally changes, you're never going to have to deal with it, really.
Right. Yeah.
Because you could just say, oh, I'll keep my maiden name, but what you're really keeping is your dad's name. It's not your mum's name, ever.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I guess you have to decide which man you like the best.
Dad or your boyfriend.
Yeah. I guess you could take a new one.
People combine both of their names and create a new one sometimes, but
yeah,
I'm in a civil partnership with my boyfriend for.
Oh, really?
We have been for a few years now, and I published my first paper last year, and I was wondering what to go by, and my name is Gachon, and his is Guillon, and I was like, we can't do Gachon Guillon. That just sounds awful. We can't do it. I'll just stick to Gachon.
I think it sounds pretty cool.
No, too many G's.
Yeah. Okay, I see that. But yeah, I guess you just have to find your professional persona and your domestic persona almost.
Yeah, which is sad.
It's sad, isn't it? And it's so it's one of those things that just holds you in the fact that you're always reminded that you have a domestic role.
Right, and consciously you can't be both all the time.
Yeah.
You have to be one or the other.
So I think that's interesting for scientists at the time, but also just still today. It brings us on to a different thing that we spoke about. What if you're Dr. Feynman? but not Dr. Richard Feynman.
Right. You're Joan.
You're Joan Feynman. There are plenty of cases where sisters or wives share their name with a famous male scientist.
Yeah.
You're always going to be playing second fiddle, aren't you? I mean, unless, of course, you're more famous. Mary Curie, maybe.
Mary Curie, yeah.
Yeah.
But she took her husband's name.
Oh, yeah, she's called, like, something long and Polish.
Soboska something.
Yeah. I feel like Curie is maybe a bit pithier. Like, it's just rolls off the tongue a bit better, Mary Curie. I mean, not a bad word about her maiden name. I'm sure it's beautiful in the mother tongue. But I think it's again a way where the names are positioned against women almost.
You're always in the shadows, basically.
Like Caroline Herschel. Even going back further, like Tycho Brahe, he actually had a younger sister who was trained in mathematics and astronomy and worked as the way Wikipedia describes it, as his assistant. Because a lot of the women are like the assistants, right? Yeah. Whereas maybe today you would have recognized them as colleagues or something else. So yeah, Sophie Brahe, she is never going to have a name for herself. I mean, if she had, it would have been now, right? So many years after. So how do you think Cecilia Payne particularly represents this idea of being
a woman
in
science? Sometimes when you're in a field with only men, you don't try to become a man, but you try to basically hide your feminine side as much as possible. And I think she just really embraced it and wasn't shy about the fact that she was sort of a lonely woman in the astrophysics field. I know that she definitely noticed it as sometimes a difficulty for her. For instance, there was a meeting at Yale that a lot of great astrophysicists in her field went to, and she couldn't go because women weren't allowed there. Yeah, but she was just that good that I think she didn't have to fake it. She could just embrace being a woman in the field because she was just that good.
Yeah, and so you told me that Cecilia Payne actually had 3 children.
She had 2 boys and a girl. All of this before she was in the States, so all of this before she obtained a tenure position. So, which means that, having kids as a female scientist, especially once you haven't secured a final position in your university or wherever, is kind of a big deal because that means you have to take time off, things like that. And she did it 3 times, so yeah. Yeah,
so it's still a thing that women face today.
Yeah.
I mean, the 2 of us, we're PhD students. When are we meant to take off time to have children, for example? Should we do it whilst we're doing our PhD? Should we do it when we're on our first postdoc, the second postdoc?
Definitely not when you're applying for a postdoc.
Definitely not when
who would hire you, you know.
Yeah, coming in there with a big belly, it wouldn't exactly be something you could hide.
No.
I mean, many times I think, like, the best time is really sort of get pregnant 8 months before Viva, do Viva, have baby, take a year out, get a postdoc, no one will ever know.
Right.
But it's so ridiculous that you would have to plan it like that. What if, like, 8 months before your Viva, it's really not the best time for you to get pregnant. Exactly. You might not even be able to, I mean, maybe you don't have a stable partner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's purely a woman problem.
Yeah. It's just so strange that it's one of those things, I guess like the name thing, that still hasn't been solved. We're not closer really to solving it.
No.
Obviously there's things happening about better parental leave, paternity leave for men as well, to kind of even the playing field.
Yeah.
I was about to say battlefield, doesn't have to be that. and also, of course, to give fathers time with their babies. I don't understand why this is not more of a thing. Well, why would you not want to spend time with your baby? I don't get it. There are things happening, but regardless, it's so structural that I think it's going to take a very long time for it to just be accepted.
Yeah. I think there needs to be more things in place to help women in science to be able to make these life choices and still be able to come into work. A lot of places now have some sort of like nursery incorporated in the university so that they can still put their kids, young children, and go if they have to breastfeed, stuff like that. But if you don't have that sort of help in the workplace, then it becomes really, really tricky. Yeah. You should be able to have your child, enjoy it for a while, and then come back and be able to still be a good, in our case, a good scientist to come back and still be considered someone that can do science and research.
Well, totally. But also, I mean, if for one thing, if men started doing this on a large scale, it would no longer be a structural issue. It might be like a parent versus non-parent issue, which is not great either, but it wouldn't be a gender issue necessarily. I mean, in general, I think academia would really benefit from being less strict about times, or not, because there's no... It's not strict, right? It's sort of like, we don't tell anyone how much they have to be here, so everyone is here really
all the
late.
time.
Yeah. And I don't necessarily think that's a good way of doing it.
No.
Yeah.
And it would also just be such a benefit if we had more women who had successful careers and also had a successful family life.
Yeah.
If they wanted to have that women that had children and that also were great scientists. If we had more examples of this, I think more girls would be encouraged to pursue those types of careers, because now you're thinking about if you've been with someone, let's say, and you're thinking about maybe getting married or starting a career, that is something you think about, which is something I really like about Cecilia Payne, because she had 3 children, and she was just so I don't know her, but I feel like she was so confident with who she is and with her life choices.
Yeah. I think if there's less of a culture of someone else is dealing with the home life, then it becomes more accepted.
Exactly.
Yeah. And, I mean, that being said, it's obviously not just a woman policy to have nurseries or good parental leave situations. It's a sort of family-oriented way, but it is going to be good for women, because you just have to accept that currently we are still having a cultural narrative that says the main responsibility of the family falls on the woman.
Right, yeah.
Even if that is wrong.
Yeah, and it would also benefit the men, I guess. They could just embrace more of their family life. And take more time off, and
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a conversation with my dad, who for a long time worked in the Danish science media. I remember once he was telling me about a presentation of a female board member who was leaving. And in her speech, she included a lot of stuff about her family and her children. And I remember him wondering why, I would never have mentioned this like that, and, it's not relevant, and it's sort of almost like this is the sort of thing you could expect from a woman. Sorry, Dad, I don't mean it that way. But you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And at the same time, my dad would tell me, being a dad to you and your sister is the best thing that ever happened to me, and you've given me a completely new perspective on life, and you've helped me through tough situations where things in my professional life have been hard, and so on. And on the one hand, you can say, well, why wouldn't you mention us? If you're leaving a board that you've been in for many years, why wouldn't you mention us?
Yeah.
Not that I, feel that you should have or anything like that, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. A bad thing. No. I mean, look at the Oscars. People thank their mum and dad all the time.
Yeah, and even if you think about English-speaking countries, I'm from France, and in France we don't really do that, but politicians refer to their families all the time.
And another thing that I think my dad in that situation, but also what he represents in that situation, that people don't recognize, is that woman had a really high-level job. She was leaving, and in her leaving speech is obviously aimed at the people in the room who are currently there, currently pursuing positions and careers within that organization. There will be women sitting in their audience thinking, oh, well, if she can do it,
I can too.
I can too. And that might not necessarily make an impression upon the men in the room who have already had children or whatever. But to see that as an unserious speech because of the mention of her family, I think is probably an example of their blindness from white male privilege. But, that's just how I read the situation. But it's just interesting to see how something that I would, if I were in that room, I would have said, oh, that's so great, that she goes out there and shows it what it's like. And then someone else sitting like, this is completely unserious. It's got nothing to do with her work.
Right, yeah.
But it has got something to do with her work, right? If she hadn't been able to have both her family and her work life, maybe she wouldn't have done the work life.
Yeah. During induction here, we the first few days we had inductions, and there was a woman that came and talked about how she was doing a Parttime PhD, I think. But basically she has 2 kids, and she was doing her PhD part-time, but she's finishing 2 years early because she did so well. And she was just saying how she basically just worked 9 to 5, was really organized, and was able to go home at 5 and take care of her kids, and everything was fine. Yeah. And when I listened to her, I was like, oh wow, good for her. Like, she did really well.
Well
done. There's a guy sitting next to me that said, having 2 kids during your PhD, that's so irresponsible.
Are you kidding?
Yeah, no.
Wow.
And I mean, I don't think he meant it in a bad way or in a mean way. He was just, I think he was like, why would you do this? Like,
yeah.
Why would you have kids during your PhD when obviously she had to do it part-time, but she did it in 4 years and it was possible. So
yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
I would never have thought that.
No, me neither. I was like, oh, wow, like, you can actually do this.
Yeah.
It's a possibility. It's not a myth.
Well, I think this is really interesting because it comes down to like people's lived experiences and telling people's stories.
Right.
And how for the people it's aimed at, for the people it's meant for, it can do a lot of good. But for other people that don't necessarily see the point of them, it can completely, it's like the point is completely lost on them,
exactly.
right? So I think that just is an argument for having as diverse as possible a profile on these things, because the people that need them will sit there and understand it, even if it's not immediately apparent to you.
Yeah.
Which again means you should probably think a lot about the diversity that you have on a decision-making level, because if the whole board who decided who to give these talks and inductions were like this man, she would never have given a talk because he thought it was irresponsible.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should probably finish there.
Okay.
But thanks very much.
Thank you.
I thought it was a really good conversation.
Yeah, me too.
Who would have thought that we could start at Cecilia Payne and end up at that? I don't know. Very, very interesting.
Next up, we take a closer look at sexual harassment in higher education, finding out how we might get rid of it altogether.
Hi, I'm Swan, and I am the project officer in the Diversity and Inclusion Central team at King's, and I work on training and resources on bullying and harassment. Prior to King's, I worked in women's rights and general feminist issues in higher education for about 4 years, and one of the main topics has always been sexual harassment. It sort of permeates every part of women's in education experience. So statistically, it technically is an epidemic. The way we've looked at it in these years have changed from only thinking about sort of physical violence as sexual harassment or sexual violence to understanding that different things like power dynamics and things that people say and things that people consider as minor sexual harassment, which has made the issue look like it's growing. But I think that because of the way that people are speaking about it, have more confidence in speaking about it, but the way technology has developed means that it's more of a well-known issue than it was prior to these years.
I'm Dr. Helen Coulshed. I'm a teaching fellow in the Department of Chemistry, but I'm also the Diversity and Inclusion Champion for my department. I'm obviously doing a physical science, and I would say that it's quite subject specific as to the extent of the problem, predominantly due to, I think, the gender imbalance. So doing a chemistry where I did my PhD, which wasn't at King's, I was in a group of 25 people and I was the only female in the group, and it was quite stark. Where I'd done my undergraduate was in London. It was very multicultural. It was actually the opposite way. There was very female heavy, which was quite a big change, I think. So I think because of that, I think the opportunity for this power imbalance, this misconduct is almost greater because of that greater gender difference, I would say. But I think it doesn't just start at sort of academic student level. I think it's something that happens amongst students as well. So I think there is an issue with understanding that this is a more professional setting than school, and that what might have been, I would say, tolerated at best is now not something that you can really continue to do, but I feel that we could possibly step in a bit more than we do at the moment.
Hi, I'm Sarah Guerra. I'm the Director of Diversity and Inclusion here at King's, and I've been in my post since about last February. This is my first job in higher education, so most of my knowledge comes from external stuff and reading the press and then listening to people as I've been here. So it feels to me like it's a reasonable problem, as in, I don't mean it's a good, but that actually it's a reasonably big problem, in that there's lots and lots of different potential power imbalances, and we are a relatively male-dominated industry, and so those things indicate that there is the likelihood of the problem. what I haven't been able to gauge here at King's for a variety of reasons is how big a problem we might have. So sexual harassment is one of a number of gender-based issues that I think exist in higher education.
Definitely, I think because we're doing work around sort of microaggressions and even defining and understanding that, because we've noticed there's quite a big problem amongst our students, but I would say it's very much a culture change. I mean, obviously this came out in the Guardian report as well, so just not wanting to make a fuss, not wanting to make the university look bad or the college or whatever. I think that's the kind of top-down, at least the impression that's given is that it's not important or, just toughen up and stuff. This is just how it is, and if you're going to survive, you have to learn to deal with these sorts of comments. And I think that's why a lot of it, I think, as you say, talking about it makes a huge difference, and seeing that it's not localised, it's something that a lot of people have probably experienced. So I think that does make people more comfortable talking about it. But I think the discussion has to continue in order for us to have any idea of the scale. I think epidemic is a very accurate word, unfortunately.
There is this very, very important and fundamental concept of academic freedom, which is the idea, which actually is about the fact that academics should be able to speak out about anything and the government can't silence them. That, to my mind, seems to have mushroomed into academics can do and say anything, and the university, as their employer, cannot do anything about it. And I think that blurred line is part of the cause of this, that I have every respect for academic freedom, and in a democracy it's really important. The fact that it's expanded to take this idea that it fends off any idea of setting behavioural standards I still find it really hard to get my head round, and it's a definite barrier in higher education, because that is one of the first things people say, well, what about academic freedom? Or people are going to say, you're limiting my academic freedom. Now, I don't know how actually many people do say that, but it's a common narrative that gets pushed back at you.
I think related to academic freedom, but generally academics in general, the whole idea of power coming along with how much funding you bring, how credible you are as a professor or whatever role you have, and that sort of giving you leeway to do what you want. Or if somebody has a complaint against you, it won't be taken up that seriously, because you yourself is such a big asset to the university that they'd rather sort of marginalise that person, bring up the complaint, than actually discipline you in a meaningful way. And those power dynamics and hierarchies within education institutions make it really hard to hold people accountable across the field in a fair way, which means that things like sexual harassment can go on for years and years and years, and people can be repeat offenders and loads of people know about it, but still nothing gets done.
I think that was one of the particular parts of the report that was very upsetting to read, was that obviously, as you say, not only were they minimalising it, or as you say, marginalising, they were then getting people to sign confidentiality agreements. And all these people were leaving their posts to take up another academic post so they could continue their reign of terror. I thought that was particularly horrifying, that potentially it hasn't even damaged their career. This has been acknowledged that it happened, but then there's no repercussions for the perpetrator, and that person potentially has had to leave midway through their degree. I mean, it seems absolutely unbelievably unfair.
It's a bit like racism. It's not acceptable, to anybody that's thinking about it. But just like racism, it's about understanding how it operates, how it manifests itself, and the fact that the person that is at the one end of it has very little ability often to do something about it, as well as it being traumatised. And so I think my personal view is there is a lot of leadership appetite and belief that they want to tackle it. The difficulty comes with what tackling it means, the uncomfortable conversations that means, the looking at the data and understanding that means somebody sitting in this room, 1 in 10 people, 1 in 20 people, whatever the data tells us, that means you know someone that's doing it, and either they're doing it and you don't realise, or you are turning a blind eye.
There isn't a sort of national framework of what good looks like, where do we want to be, because like Sarah said, that involves asking the hard questions and changing really ancient policies. At the moment there's lots of universities across the country that have amazing visual campaigns, King's included, that sort of send the message that this isn't acceptable here. But when we are looking at change and what makes students' experiences better, you need to look at the underneath, like what the structures look like. Are they working? Because you can't tell if a system was working until a survivor says, my universities were actually helpful, my perpetrator actually kicked off campus, until like there are no survivors, because it hasn't happened yet. We can't tell until we know the feedback from students themselves. So whilst these like visual campaigns are great, what we should be hearing from is people that actually felt supported, not people that felt let down by their institution.
I'm going to steal Saswana's thunder a little bit, but one of the things that I find interesting is one of the things that's made the most impact on gender equality in higher education is the Athena Swan framework. Yet there is nothing built into that framework that tackles harassment specifically or seeks to tackle it. I mean, there is a general inclusion element where you could build it in, but that would have been a very powerful driver if that framework included what are you doing, or what is your evidence in this area, and what are you doing to tackle it? Because, and I think that would be a really powerful step forward, given that it's such a intrinsic framework that we operate to.
Yeah, Sarah knows one of my pet concerns is that Athena Swan is something that's used across the UK. Like, people take it really seriously, and they could have had an aspect of it that looked on this work which would have made it useful to have some sort of way of sort of measuring up to other universities, sharing best practice and things like that, but also getting departments within the institution to think about what we're doing as a department and an institution to fight this. Because at the moment we are lacking a framework and lacking that sort of guidance. To make something new would take ages. We might as well improve what we have at the moment.
My one reservation, being having been part of several Athena Swan committees, is that the only way it's really taken on board, and people, like particularly academics, people that are very grant funding driven, have really taken on board and really run with it, is if it's a top-down approach. So often it's viewed as a box ticking, we have to do this, otherwise we're going to get a slapped wrist if we don't have a bronze or whatever, which I really despise, because I'm very passionate, as are these lovely people in the room, so about diversity and inclusion. But one of the excellent things that the Medical Research Council and several medical-based funding bodies have done is say that it's obligatory for you to have at least a silver award to even apply for their large pots of money. And I think I would really appreciate that level of commitment from grant funders as well, for places like the Royal Society of Chemistry or the European Research Council. I think that we should be looking that it's coming externally, and we're doing it internally as well. I think that's as responsible as what we should be working towards, if possible.
One of the things that they could have done is create a regulation around sexual harassment and behaviour, to make sure that institutions across the country, if they want to get funding as a public institution, do set like activities or things around sexual harassment in order to get that funding, and also gathering data. At the moment, annually, it's been places like National Union of Students doing the survey. I know that this year they've built it into the NSS very loosely, about a question about, do you feel safe on campus, which can mean absolutely anything. Where are the specific questions around, have you experienced a certain amount of harassment? That's where we need to get the big scale data, which we can then localise to see what is happening on our campuses.
I mean, really powerfully, if you look in Australia, I don't know the terms of the bodies, but essentially every university took part in a survey that enabled them to establish the position across all the universities in the country. They have all now created both a sort of national and local level plan to start to tackle the problem. The UK could easily do that. And it would then, so I feel confident that we at King's are very determined to tackle this. But if we weren't, there is not that much that forces us to.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree, and I think that's why trying to minimise the effort with, if you're kind of building it into Athena Swan, which, as you say, is a well-established infrastructure. So rather than creating extra work, if we can have it so that it's just normalised as something that everybody does, everybody has the active bystander training, everybody does unconscious bias training. These are just these are, I don't like the word compulsory, but these are just
They're part of being a good citizen in the university.
And I think, a lot of the things, where you look at creating graduates and what do we want to see from people that have passed through our institution. And I would say, these are essential parts to being a good citizen, a good graduate from King's. So I think it's only going to benefit us whilst they're here and them and the world, hopefully, once they've left, if they have a better awareness and hopefully, much more aware of their own sort of biases and, potential issues that, they could have had based on their upbringing that maybe it made them more ignorant than they would have liked, and then this will hopefully remedy at least some of that.
Here at King's, I suppose one of the things I'd really like to stress is we do have anonymous reporting. We have online resources to provide support to people. We have a consent matters course that we ask every single student to take. That is being rolled out. The training is being rolled out further to staff. We have an active bystander training programme, and we would really encourage people to participate.
For our final segment today, we'll have a chat with Sawa, an artist turned scientist who fought for 5 years to have her work on energy-generating bacterial wallpaper published in Nature.
I'm Sawa. I come from Japan. I've spent many years in London doing my degree in architecture and then master's in design and PhD in the intersection of design and biotechnology using algae. I would call myself a biodesigner. It's an exciting area where science and design meet. And I think I work in the depths of science meeting design. So design's not just using science, but giving something back to science. I kind of stumbled across this new method of printing living cells. Through this inkjet printing technique, I worked on electricity production of algae through photosynthesis, and through that we developed a new application of digitally printed algae on conductive surface on paper. The result has been really great because we received a lot of good press coverage over the paper, because it basically shows it's possible to use this printing technique to produce biodegradable, eco-friendly solar cell battery. This is something we think is missing in the market. Although it's just a proof of technology, we think this is showing a new possibility which it doesn't quite exist in this kind of bioenergy market, at least.
So one of the things that you mentioned in your paper is this idea of the printing of the wallpaper.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk to me a bit about that idea?
So the bioenergy wallpaper is wallpaper with conductive circuitry as pattern, plus the printed photosynthetic cells like algae and cyanobacteria also on top of the circuitry, producing energy and possibly acting as biosensors, which could monitor the air quality. It may not be suitable for powering TV, but quite perfect already for biosensors. That's what I really wanted to develop in the first place anyways. Just to kind of bring in this kind of possibility of improving indoor space. We focus a lot on the exterior, but we actually spend like 60 to 90% of our time indoor. So it makes sense to improve our indoor space. This paper was initially rejected, and we had very, very bad reviews, but reviews were quite unfair. And we had to work very hard to come back with enough data for the rebuttals. I was the only one actually, driving this.
So how long has this paper been underway?
So the paper itself is about since 2015, but then the work itself is from 2012. Yes.
Wow.
So it's quite a long process, and you would see the submitted date and accepted date have like almost a year gap. So you can see, there was quite a lot of work to be caught up, to be accepted. The rest of the team kind of gave up. We knew that it was a matter of just getting extra data. It was all down to doing more work. And I just wanted to have this one, the paper published. So I thought if it's just about doing more work, then why not? I thought it was worth it. And the senior scientists have experiences of good and bad. So they would say to me, don't be upset if it won't go through, and it's always the case. You just have to decide that it's going to work, and then just sort of do everything possible to make it work. It was very tricky. It's quite easy to, give up after you finished your PhD. Somehow this paper was very important for me.
You've been listening to The Science Fix. This episode was organised by Emily Gachon and me. Additional thanks to Tanya Daub and the WiSTEM at King's team. Music by Blue Dot Sessions.